Hi everyone, welcome. It's very nice to have you all here. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Qesher. You can also see here Sebastian. We both work on these events together, and we started this project, which is called Qesher. And I know that many of you have been to our events in the past. And our aim is to introduce Jewish communities from all over the world. This is our usual events that many of you probably have seen in the past. And today we have a bit of a special series, part of a special series, which is the Qesher Book Club. And here we introduce Jewish themed books that are somehow related to our overall theme of learning about Jewish life around the world. And today we are very happy to welcome Sarah Ansbacher, who is the author of Wave After Wave. And this is the book that she's going to introduce to us today. And of course, she will share about many, many details and background about why this book came to be and to learn about it. And we hope that you guys will feel like reading it at the end. So I will pass the word to Sarah. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. And after her presentation, we will, of course, have time for Q&A.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Sebastian, for inviting me this evening. And thanks to all of you as well for taking the time to join us. So to start, I'll begin by introducing myself. I'm an author of 7 books. I started writing while still in my teens. My first book, a YA novel, was published when I was 18. 2 more YA novels followed, and then a historical novel about the Kindertransport. And these were published under my maiden name. I then took a hiatus for a few years, during which time I made Aliyah with my family from the UK. And how I came to write the next 3 books, culminating with Wave After Wave, is a story in itself, a little story. And the link that connects them all is seemingly chance conversations, which ultimately developed into something a little bigger. It was a conversation with an acquaintance that sparked the idea for my novel Ayuni, which tells the story of a girl from a Hasidic family and a boy from the Adani community living in the same North London neighborhood who accidentally meet. It was a conversation with a writer friend who, when I shared the plot of this novel, asked me, "What's Adani?" Growing up in London, I was familiar with this unique Jewish community from the port city of Aden, a former British colony. And it's now a part of Yemen. You may have heard of it a little bit in the news recently. My friend, having grown up in the States, however, had never heard of the community before. And that's when I realized I needed to revise the novel. And it prompted me to visit the Aden Jewish Heritage Museum in Tel Aviv in order to better answer that question. Fast forward 6 months later, and I was offered a job to work at the museum, which I accepted. And I now spend several days a week answering that very question for our visitors. But the visitors in turn often share fascinating stories with me. And I began to write them down so I wouldn't forget them. Then, in 2020, with the onset of Corona, we were forced to close the museum for several months. As a lockdown project, I decided to turn those notes into a compilation of short stories, and that became the book, Passage from Aden. One of those stories was born out of a short conversation with a woman in her 80s who told me a tale from her childhood growing up in Tel Aviv in the 1940s. And it was while researching the background details for that one that I happened to stumble upon another story. A little-known true story about a group of Jewish refugees, mainly from Vienna, Prague, and Danzig, who attempted to escape Nazi-occupied Europe during the Second World War, hoping to find a safe haven in Israel, which at the time was British-controlled Mandatory Palestine. It was a journey filled with danger every step of the way. They were at the mercy of circumstances beyond their control. Sometimes they were helped by good people they encountered along the way, but they were frequently betrayed by others. These Jewish refugees came from different walks of life. They were ordinary people fleeing for their lives. They found courage in the most extraordinary circumstances and optimism in the most hopeless situations. In their own way, they were heroes. The story moved and inspired me. I decided at once that the next novel I would write would be based on these events. Little did I realize then the immensity of the project, the time, the research, writing and revisions that it would take. It involved reading several history books, diaries, first-hand accounts, trawling through the archives of various museums, speaking to historians and people who actually experienced the events as young children. I also went on a research trip to Vienna and Bratislava in 2022 as part of my research. Earlier this year, after over 3 years of work, my novel, Wave After Wave, finally launched. And this is it here. And I'd like to share with you a little bit more about the story, the historical background behind the novel, and the significance of this very day, 8th of October, and how it came to be that over 3,000 Jewish refugees managed to escape Nazi-occupied Europe, beginning their journey on 4 overcrowded paddle steamers in what was to be the largest convoy of Jews ever to escape Europe via the Danube River during World War II. Wave After Wave is mainly told through the eyes of Lily, a newly married Jewish woman from Vienna, and her cousin Hannah. Though most of the characters are fictitious, I've tried to stay as close as possible to the actual events. There are cameos of several real people and historical characters. Additionally, there's also some meaning behind the names of the fictional characters. They're mostly named for relatives of mine who perished in the Shoah, a way to honour them, in a sense, to give them a parallel life. The story opens on 10th of November 1938, with a catalyst for the events to follow, Kristallnacht. The sound of breaking glass shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Somewhere in the distance, shards cascaded onto the street to incongruous laughter. What was that? Lily reached across to her husband's side of the bed to find it empty, the covers flung back in haste. Her bare arms bristled against the unexpected rush of cold air. Salo stood beside the window, craning his neck to peer out. Another smash, louder and closer than before. Salo, what's happening? Lily said, her heart pounding. I'm not sure. It sounds like there's a crowd working their way along the street, smashing shop windows. Lily leapt from the bed to join him. We should call the police. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are the police. They aren't targeting shops at random, are they? Salo shook his head. I think they know exactly which ones to target. An unfamiliar tension had crept into his calm, even tones. A heavy thud against the shop front caused Lily to flinch. From the window of a nearby apartment, a woman screamed. What about our shop? Lily tried to control her rising panic. At ground level, 3 floors below their apartment, was her father's leather goods and luggage shop, first established by her late grandfather and now managed by Salo. There's nothing we can do. We'll have to stay put until they've gone and pray they don't cause too much damage. I wish we could leave this place. Lily retreated from the window, hugging herself. We will soon. When? How much longer is it going to take? She said. We've been trying for over 6 months already. So have Papa and Mama, and none of us are any closer to securing visas. There's not a single country we haven't tried. I don't mind where we go. I just want to get out. Salo placed a steadying hand on Lily's shoulder. In the dim light, his dark eyes looked even more brooding than usual. So do I, my love. I wish I had the means to already secure visas and travel passes for us all. At this point, let me now briefly give you a little bit of historical background, and I'm going to start sharing a screen with some slides for you to see. Okay. At the beginning of the 1930s, Vienna's Jewish population numbered over 200,000. It was the 6th largest Jewish community in the world. But in March 1938, with the Anschluss, the German annexation of Austria, the situation for the Jewish community changed almost overnight. There was supposed to have been a vote whether Austria wants to unite with Germany, but the vote never happened. The Nazis simply marched in. Suddenly, Austria was under Nazi rule, and the Jews subject to restrictions and persecution. Austrians who wanted to remain independent had painted political slogans on the pavement. And one of the first things the Nazi did was make the Jews scrub the pavements, which is what you can see in the picture here. The Jewish community immediately tried to leave. They queued outside every embassy. They tried every possible way. And in the novel, this is what Lily is alluding to. The biggest problem for the Jewish community, though, was where to go. Every country, including the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, and South Africa, was tightening its immigration policies, limiting the amount of immigrants they would accept. Israel, the one country where Jews should have found a safe haven, was also closed to them. It was then British-controlled mandatory Palestine, and throughout the late 30s, the British continually tightened immigration quotas. Some opted for the illegal immigration route to Israel, attempting to smuggle past the British blockade. This was dangerous. There were no guarantees. And generally, those ships were organized by the Yishuv. They were only for young people who would be chalutzim, pioneers, setting up and working on kibbutzim. So the problem was not that the Jews could not get out. Germany actually encouraged Jewish immigration right up until 1941. The problem was that they had nowhere to go. And the fact that the Nazis stripped the Jews of work, homes, possessions, froze their bank accounts, meant that so many no longer had the means to travel anywhere. As this cartoon from 1938 shows, just at the point where the Jews most needed to leave, there was nowhere to go. Then came Kristallnacht, and the situation became even more desperate. In the first couple of chapters of the book, we follow Lily as she experiences the terror of Kristallnacht. But through Lily, we also learn what the city was like before the Nazi invasion or annexation. Now, this proved to be somewhat of a challenge to write. How to describe places that no longer exist. How to recreate a city as it was. For example, Lily reminisces about the Qesher temple, the Sephardi synagogue, which she had attended with her best friend, whose family were members there. And she describes it like this: the most beautiful synagogue she'd ever seen, a wonder of the world, like its design inspiration, the Alhambra Palace in Granada, Spain. But as you can see, the Qesher temple was destroyed during Kristallnacht, along with every other synagogue in Vienna, with only one exception. Here's a picture I took in 2022 during my research trip to Vienna. This is what now stands in its place. But from the memorial plaque on its facade, you can see what the exterior once looked like. Beautiful. I used old pictures, paintings, and descriptions to give me a sense of the former grandeur, like this painting here. I also visited the main synagogue, the Stadttempel, which is the only remaining synagogue in Vienna to have survived Kristallnacht. And it gave me some idea of the scale, and you can probably see that some aspects of the design are similar, such as the domed roof. Another landmark that appears in the early chapters is the train station. During the course of my research, I discovered how it's often used as a meeting point. In a first-hand account, one woman describes how she would meet her boyfriend there when she was about 16 years of age. And I thought it'd be a nice touch to use it as a location for Lily to meet Sulla, who later becomes her husband. Well, at the point they're still dating. However, looking at a contemporary map of Vienna, the setting didn't make sense at all, as the main station is very far to the south of the second district, which is the main Jewish neighborhood. And it would have taken at least an hour to walk there. But then I discovered an old map of Vienna from 1925, and I realized that there used to be a main train station called the Nordbahnhof, right in the heart of the Jewish area of the second district. Except the Nordbahnhof was bombed during the war and then totally destroyed in the 1950s. Once again, I used old pictures and postcards to help me. Here you can see the exterior and the grand entrance hall. When Lily thinks back to the days when she used to meet Sulla in the Nordbahnhof, she remembers how their rendezvous point would be next to the statue of the station's founder, Salomon Rothschild. A little later in the story, Lily returns to the station's grand hall to meet someone who helps her in her efforts to flee Vienna. But this time, the statue is no longer there because the Nazis removed it after the Anschluss. However, it was not destroyed. The statue today is on display in Vienna's Jewish Museum, and I went to visit him there. So, how does Lily eventually manage to leave Vienna? Towards the end of 1939, after the war had already broken out, there suddenly came a small window of opportunity. We need to talk. Hannah sat on her bed and tapped her foot until Lily settled down on her own. I found a way out, she said. You're not thinking of escaping across the border again, Lily said. No, nothing like that. This is a proper immigration scheme. She paused, making sure Lily was listening to her. To Eretz Israel. Lily, who had long since abandoned all thoughts of being able to leave, leaned in closer. Eretz Israel? Hannah's face softened into a gentle smile. Yes. How? They're organising a transport of Jews to sail by boat along the Danube to Romania, then by ship through the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. That's unbelievable. Since the start of the war, it had become almost impossible to leave the country, especially as a Jew. And you said it's an official immigration scheme? Yes. It's being organised by a man called Bertold Storfer through the Central Office of Jewish Emigration. What? Lily jumped from the bed, the springs creaking with her movement. It sounded like it should be a helpful organisation, but Lily had her doubts. In the summer after the Anschluss, a Nazi lackey named Adolf Eichmann had set up the office to supervise the emigration and expulsion of Jews from Vienna. Don't go. It's a trap. I don't think so. They said they would give me an exit permit and documents to travel. Bertold Storfer, the organiser, is Jewish, and he's trying to help the Jews leave Vienna. Who is he? Do you even know anything about this Bertold Storfer? For the first time, Hannah seemed less confident. I'm not sure. He's a businessman, I think. So you don't know him? Lily said. Do you know anyone who does? No. Yes, that was the very same Eichmann. And many Jews like Lily were suspicious about Bertold Storfer. He was an ambiguous person. He helped arrange these transports, but he was working for Eichmann. Was he a collaborator? Or was he really trying to help the Jews? They weren't quite sure. And for those in the first group who left, their suspicions grew further. In December 1939, the first groups left in small groups to Bratislava, Slovakia, including her cousin Hannah. They thought they would be transferred almost immediately onto paddle boats, but when they got there, they were detained, some at a hostel called the Slobodana. This is one of the only photographs I was able to find of the Slobodana. Here you can see the Jewish refugees in the exercise yard. But with the help of that picture, descriptions and diary entries, and Google, I managed to locate the building and find an old picture of it online. This is what it looks like today. And here you can see, side by side, the picture of the exercise yard from 1940 and a picture I took in 2022 of almost the same angle. Today, the Slobodana is an office building and the exercise yard is a car park. Some of the refugees were sent to another location, the Petronka. This was a former factory complex that manufactured bullets during the First World War. Conditions there were even worse. And finding the Petronka proved to be even more difficult for me than the Slobodana. Today on the site is a school for children with learning disabilities. It was also very hard to get permission to visit the site. They also had a language barrier. We had to use Google Translate to help, but eventually the administration agreed. Just one building remains of the old Petronka complex. This is the interior. It's an eerie place. The refugees spent 9 months detained at the Slobodarna and Petronka, and part of the reason for that was that during the winter, the Danube completely froze over and they couldn't travel any further. During my research, I also discovered a couple of surprises, 2 separate family connections to this place. My paternal grandfather's cousins were part of a group held at the Petronka until they were finally able to leave on a paddle boat. Not the main one that I describe, but they go on one, which I'll discuss in a minute, called the Uranus, and then onto a boat called the Pacific. Also, in this very same place, the Petronka, 2 years later, once the Jews had left, the 1942 roundup of the Jews in Slovakia began. The first group were a group of 1,000 young women, aged 18 to 25. 3 of them were my maternal grandfather's cousins, Lottie and her sisters Lily and Erica. They were kept in the abandoned buildings of the Petronka for 5 days before being handed over to the Nazis and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. Lottie was the only survivor from her immediate family, and you probably now recognize the names Lily as a character in the novel. Erica is another. In September 1940, the journey began in earnest from Bratislava, but unfortunately not before there was a tragedy. When some of the passengers were boarding this very paddle steamer, the Helios, someone tripped and fell into the Danube and was never found. While doing research, I wasn't able to initially figure out what had happened. Every source gave a different story. One diary said that they'd been pushing and shoving and he fell in. Another said there'd been a blackout. Another also some sort of confusion with a blackout. It wasn't very clear. The other thing was that 2 separate groups boarded this ship. The group from the Slobodarna, and the day before that, a group from Danzig. Now, depending on when this accident happened, one of the people who wrote the diary would never have been there when this accident took place, so it was all hearsay. I managed to solve a little bit of the mystery when I spoke to a man who helped me with my research, who was around 10 years old and came from Danzig. And he remembers the incident, and he explained to me that no, it wasn't that they were pushing and shoving. Some of the passengers from the Danzig group offered to help carry suitcases for the rest of the passengers. And as he was trying to load them onto the ship, he slipped and fell. It was very dark, it was a blackout, and his body was never recovered. And unfortunately, this is how the journey began for some of the passengers, with this terrible, terrible tragedy. The Helios was one of the paddle steamers, another was the Uranus, and they were joined by 2 more paddle steamers, the Schönbrunn, which came directly from Vienna, and the Malk, with Jews mainly from Prague and Brno. The Schönbrunn, which is pictured here, is the only paddle steamer from the time that still exists, and today it's used for short pleasure cruises along the Danube. This transport of 4 overcrowded paddle steamers filled with 3,000 desperate Jews left Bratislava with a swastika flag fluttering from every mast. And why would the Nazis then assist? The reason being that the Nazis wanted to repatriate ethnic Germans living further down the Danube in Bessarabia. And rather than send those ships empty, they overcharged these Jewish refugees, let them go down there, and basically they paid for the return journey of the ethnic Germans who they wanted to repatriate. And it was the largest convoy of Jewish refugees to escape the Danube during wartime. Upon reaching Romania, the Jewish refugees transferred to 3 decrepit, overcrowded ships, the largest of which was the Atlantic, and the one that most of the characters in my story travel on. This is a picture drawn by one of the passengers who travelled on the ship. The ship was scheduled to leave on the 7th of October. When I first began writing the novel, that date carried no real meaning. But by the time I was working with my editor on final revisions, the tragedy of the 7th of October had taken place, and the date had taken on a whole new meaning. My editor asked me if that was the actual date, otherwise perhaps we should consider changing it, but that was the actual date. However, things didn't quite go according to plan, and the Atlantic finally left Romania on the 8th of October 1940, this very date. So it's quite poignant that we're doing this talk this evening. I don't want to ruin too much of the story for you, in case you haven't yet read Wave After Wave, but what I can tell you is practically everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Once they left Romania, the refugees were basically on their own. They had no proper communication equipment. They had an unreliable captain, a drawing of whom you can see here. There was no Haganah. The passengers created their own organisation, which they called the Haganah, to keep order on board. There were delays, food shortages, and severe overcrowding, as you can see in this photograph, which is an actual photograph of the Atlantic. Sometimes the ship listed too far to one side or the other, and to stop it listing too much, someone on the bridge would shout through a megaphone, "To the left, to the right," exactly as you see in this picture. There were storms, several of them. In one diary entry I read, during the very first storm, the person writing a diary, a passenger on the ship who was in the hold, describes how the passengers started saying Shema, and he describes that they thought they were going to die. This actually made no sense, because later they encounter an even more severe storm, and he doesn't mention that anyone's praying or saying Shema. So I couldn't figure out why suddenly here, until I looked at a calendar from 1940. And I realized that on the day they encountered this first storm, it was Yom Kippur. And what I know from descriptions is that the passengers were actually holding a service on the deck. So what was actually happening here, I believe, is that it was towards the end of the service, towards the evening, the Ne'ilah service, and the passengers were basically running from one side of the ship to the other, as they were told to the left, to the right, and trying to carry on Ne'ilah, the prayers, at the same time. But as well as dangers and disaster, there was also kindness along the way, especially from some of the local Jewish communities, including those in Istanbul and Crete, who donated food and supplies. And friendships were made. Lily and Hannah form a bond with a group of people. They call themselves the Lifeboat Chevra. And this is a picture of the lifeboat on the deck of the Atlantic that inspired it. And here's a picture of a group of young people on the Atlantic, just like Lily, Hannah, Erica and Yanka, Alexander and Isaac. But what happened to them? Do they survive the journey? For that, you'll have to read the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So we will open up now for questions. I saw that some people read your book already. I saw it in the chat. So if anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts or something they're curious about or clarification about the presentation, please feel free to ask. You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. Someone asked if it's paperback or Kindle, or how is the book possible? How can you buy it?
Both. It's available paperback, Kindle. It's also in Kindle Unlimited. So you can order it from Amazon, but you can order it from most bookstores. You may not find it in stock, but you should be able to go in and order it, request to order it from most places.
Thank you. And yeah, if there are any questions about the book or about the history that Sarah shared, then please feel free to ask. I had a question while I was looking at the pictures and the friendships that you mentioned different groups who were traveling, like Czechs and Slovaks and Austrians, and what language were they speaking?
Mainly German. Yeah, they were mainly speaking German. Some would have also spoken Yiddish as well. Along the way, they tried to learn Hebrew. Some of them would have had some knowledge, especially those who were chalutzim. So you did have friendships, but as you'll see in the novel, they also come from various different groups. And so there were a lot of arguments along the way as well. Frequent arguments between different groups.
There's a question, I think you mentioned this earlier, but if you can repeat what year was the trip?
So the trip took place in 1940 between the journey on the paddle steamers from September to November 1940.
Thank you. And I see the family members finding out also stories from your own family.
Yes.
So what did you find out your own family story while you were doing this research, or was that something that you already knew?
It was while I was doing research. Basically, after I visited the Petronka, no, actually, again, before I visited the Petronka, I suddenly discovered that my grandfather's first cousin Lottie had been there, had spent 5 days there, interned before they were rounded up and taken to Auschwitz. So I went to the Petronka already knowing it had some significance to my family. But at the time, I only had a few minutes to take pictures there. So I couldn't get too moved at that particular time. I just really had to focus and take pictures. I've actually written a little article on it in Times of Israel. So if anyone's a little bit more interested in that visit, they can go to Times of Israel and just type in my name or Petronka, and it should come up. When I returned from that trip to Vienna and Bratislava, what I didn't realize at the time and only realized afterwards is the very day that we visited the Petronka was 80 years to the day when Lottie was brought there, my grandfather's cousin Lottie and her sisters. So that was particularly moving to realize that literally 80 years there was this connection between her being there and us then going. As for the other connection, this I only discovered very, very recently. Cousin of mine, who I think is still on the Zoom, who lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, discovered us basically. We were kind of long lost family, and through her, I met other family who live in Haifa just this summer. And this was my paternal grandfather's cousin, and speaking to him, I discovered, which I didn't realize when I was writing the book, and suddenly realized I had a closer connection than I had realized, is that one of my grandfather's cousins was in the Petronka with the Jewish refugees and went on the paddle steamers and on the Pacific, a sister ship to the Atlantic. So they traveled together in this same convoy.
Thank you. And I see a comment here from John and Yedida. I've read the book and met Sarah, so you probably know who I'm speaking about. My grandmother was on the sister ship the Pacific. So Sarah's story is my grandmother's story. Even though I am familiar with the book and the history, I again have goosebumps listening to it. So I just thought that that's a very moving comment.
Sarah, can I come in at this point and mention,
Yeah.
or ask you to mention, first of all, this John and Sarah. It's very interesting that they say that their sister was on the ship the Pacific, so they obviously landed up in Mauritius as well at some
No,
point.
no, they didn't. Don't. No spoilers. No. I will tell you what happened to them.
All right, okay.
That comes to this book is actually part of a trilogy. So this will come
So they
later.
didn't. Okay, I see. All right.
Yeah, I will explain.
Yeah. Well, just to tell everybody that I've read the book and I've done a lot of research with Sarah, and it's fantastic. Whoever hasn't read it, you've got to read it, and the next one that's coming after it, you've got to read as well. It's absolutely brilliant. It's live Jewish history. It's really fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's a question from David. Is the book in libraries? He runs a book group for Brandeis and would like to know if you would like to do another book club for them.
Right. I'm not sure if it is in libraries, but you should be able to request it, request that it's ordered. And yeah, sure, I'm happy to Zoom with book groups, book clubs. Sure, no problem.
Thank you. So probably many of you know, but after every talk, we send out a follow-up email. So you will also receive the recording of this presentation. And also we will send out, of course, links to where you can find Sarah's book. And also we will include the article that you mentioned about the Petronka as well. And Sarah, if you don't mind, we'll include your email address. And then whoever would like to invite you or get in touch, then you will have the chance to do it through that. Next question is, where did your immediate family emigrate from and when? So you partially started telling the story, but
right. Okay. So although this isn't a story about my family, why it feels also very connected is because there are connections between this story and my own. My father's parents were from Germany, but they escaped a different way, separately to South Africa. And my mother's parents, my grandfather was from Bratislava, and my grandmother from Vienna. They managed to flee to London through my grandfather's Czechoslovak passport before the war. Unfortunately, my grandmother wasn't able to get her parents out because they were still in Vienna with a then German passport. So unfortunately, they were trapped and got rounded up in 1942. So yeah, it's quite a mixture.
Thank you. And the next question is, when will the trilogy be available?
Right. So I'm working on the second one now. Hopefully it'll be available early in the new year, and the third part, hopefully a few months after that. Most of the research is already done for all three, so it's just a matter of getting the stories done now.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, please feel free to share or speak up or ask. So, and while we wait for that, I'll just give you a little information about our upcoming events. This Thursday, we will have an event, a very special event about a city called Mosul, which is in Iraq. And the person who is going to present is called Omar Mohammed. Some of you may have heard of Mosul I. He was actually exiled from Iraq for discovering Jewish heritage and registering the history of the Jewish community in Mosul. So it's going to be a very special event. He lives in France now. And on Sunday, we will have a talk about Istanbul. So we hope, I know there are many holidays now, and I know that Yom Kippur is coming up, but before and after, we are here for you. And I see that some more comments are coming in. Debbie wrote that she's halfway through the book and is going to read it further. Okay, someone, Brian says, I enjoyed reading wave after wave, but I was a bit confused with all the locations in Vienna. I needed a map to see these locations. Also, a map of the girl's journey down the Danube would have been helpful. So maybe that's something that can be added for the next edition, some maps like you shared also in the presentation.
Actually in the book there is now a map of the Danube journey and also the Atlantic journey, which were drawn by passengers along the way. So they're real maps. I don't have one of Vienna, but I could always put a little something together as a PDF or something and circle the landmarks. So yeah, something I could look at doing.
Thank you. And there are many comments about your writing style as well. I saw that a lot of people who read your book or partially read it are writing that it's very enjoyable how you write. So I just want to share this with all those who haven't read anything from you yet, that this makes it sound very, very tempting to read.
Thank you so much.
So yeah, the next talks that I mentioned, they are possible to register to there for payment. And with your payment, you support partly Qesher, and also you can always read. We always also give a donation to a specific community or project that, on our registration forms. You can also read that, and they are on our upcoming events. We will also share them with you tomorrow, and you can also, you're welcome to visit our website also to find out about our further events. And there's one more question, if those pictures that you showed today in the presentation, if they are also in the book.
So they are available. What it would have been too much to put them in that book, would have been too thick. But what I have put together is a companion ebook, which is free of charge. And you can just go to my website, sarahansbacher.com, and you can, there's a link to download the companion ebook, and it has pictures and a little bit more explanation about the research involved.
Thank you very much. And of course, we will share also your website. And I guess in your website, you can also, people can find information about your other books as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, we will share this with all the registrants. Okay, so I don't see now more questions. I'm sure many people have questions about what's going to happen, but hopefully they will read the book and find out these stories. So we'd like to thank you, Sarah, for joining us and sharing about your book. And of course, thank you everyone for being here. And tomorrow, as always, you will receive the recording of this talk and also information about Sarah's books.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, and
well done, Dora.
Thank you for joining.
Sebastian, be well.
Thank
you
you
for being here.
Ciao.
Thank you.
And Shana Tova and Gemar Chatima Tova to everyone.
Shana Tova.
We hope to see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.